currently, the armed forces are facing a troop shortage. Over the past 7 years, the number of troops has decreased by 110,000. This means that the minimum required number of 500,000 troops is not being met, and the current number has dropped to 450,000. In 2019, there were 563,000 troops, but now that number has decreased to 450,000. That's a decrease of 113,000 troops. In particular, the army has seen a significant reduction. In 2019, the army had 429,000 troops, but now that number has dropped to 324,000. If we look only at army soldiers, the number has decreased from 303,000 to 205,000, a reduction of nearly 100,000. Due to the low birth rate, several divisions have simply disappeared. This is how severe the troop shortage is. So the military decided to merge and reorganize divisions. In 2006, South Korea had a total of 59 divisions, but now that number has dropped to 41. Just last November, the 28th Division, also known as the Typhoon Division, was disbanded. The military says the reduction in troops is due to the continuous decrease in available manpower caused by the declining population. They believe that various factors such as a decline in preference for career military roles due to improved treatment of enlisted soldiers have played a role. The military also announced that they will continue to review various measures to prepare for a declining population, such as expanding the use of civilian personnel in non-combat areas and making long-term use of officers and non-commissioned officers. In this situation, the remarks made by the head of the Military Manpower Administration are causing a lot of controversy. Hong So-young, the head of the Military Manpower Administration, announced stricter conscription standards to secure more male military personnel in response to the decrease in standing forces. The measures include raising the exemption age for those who have stayed abroad for a long time to 43 and expanding the conscription targets to include naturalized citizens, North Korean defectors, and more men in general. At the same time, controversy is growing as he reiterated his position that the introduction of conscription for women will not be considered. The Military Manpower Administration is planning to raise the age for exemption from mandatory enlistment to 43 by 2026 and is also reviewing policies regarding about 1,000 naturalized or North Korean defector men each year. And they are also planning to tighten the criteria for exempting people with mental health issues so that more of them can be sent to active duty. As someone who has served in the military myself, I have a lot I want to say about this. Anyway, the Military Manpower Administration is trying to solve the current severe manpower shortage by bringing more men into the military. As I mentioned earlier, the number of troops is decreasing significantly, but what's even more noteworthy is that even after taking measures to increase the active duty selection rate, they still couldn't prevent the manpower shortage. The active duty selection rate rose from 69.8% to 86.7%, an increase of 16.9 percentage points. This was a measure to secure enlistment numbers by increasing the proportion of those classified as active duty among those subject to military service. But as the number of young people taking the military service examination itself fell in the first place, the effectiveness was limited. No matter how much the rate of those classified as active duty increases, if the population subject to examination continues to decrease, the absolute number of people entering the military will inevitably continue to decline. What's even more concerning is that a similar trend is appearing not only among soldiers, but also among the career military personnel responsible for the military's expertise. The selection rate for career military personnel, which was about 90 in 2019, has dropped to about 50 in 2024. This means that the military is not able to recruit enough personnel as planned. It's already difficult to secure enough soldiers, and if we can't secure enough officers and non-commissioned officers as well, it could become even more burdensome to maintain the specialized personnel needed for unit operations, training, and equipment management. But the problems currently occurring in the military are not limited to just the decrease in new personnel. The number of mid-level leaders who are already serving and choosing to leave the military is also rapidly increasing. In 2021, 960 mid-level leaders applied for voluntary discharge, but that number rose to 1,301 in 2022, 1,495 in 2023, and reached 1,821 in 2024. By September 2025, at September 2025, 1,327 people had already applied for voluntary discharge. When experienced officers leave, the increase in the number of people taking leave is also something to pay attention to. In 2021, 2,252 people were on leave, but that number continued to rise to 2,612 in 2022, 3,068 in 2023, and 3,412 in 2024. By September 2025, it had already been recorded that 3,401 people had taken leave. In addition, since the number of non-commissioned officers, and new recruits is also decreasing, the military is seeing a structure where incoming personnel are decreasing while the departure of existing personnel is increasing. In particular, mid-level leaders are personnel who have accumulated experience in unit operations, equipment management, personnel and training, and operational procedures while serving in the military for a certain period of time. They are truly like the backbone of the military. Even if their positions are filled with new junior leaders, it is difficult to immediately achieve the same level of proficiency. Therefore, the current issue of recruiting career military personnel can affect not only the overall number of troops, but also the military's proficiency and command structure. The decrease in population is not only reducing the number of soldiers, but also affecting the ability to secure the specialized personnel needed to maintain the military. This makes the situation even more serious. Looking ahead, the outlook is even more concerning. If the current population structure and conscription system of the armed forces continue, it is expected that the total number of soldiers will decrease to 290,000 in 2030, 260,000 in 2035, and as low as 150,000 by 2040. In particular, it is estimated that the number of new recruits entering the military in 2040 will be around 100,000. As the number of people joining the military will decrease significantly compared to now, it will inevitably become more difficult to maintain the current force structure. The problem is that Korea is not the only country experiencing a population decline. North Korea is also affected by a decline in birth rates, but if we look at the current size of North Korea's military and its service system, the manpower gap between South and North Korea is likely to persist for quite some time. Based on data from the National Statistical Office, if we assume that the conscription rate in 2022 and 2040 remains the same, the size of the North Korean military in 2040 is estimated to be about 1.13 million. On the other hand, it is projected that at the same point in time, South Korea's total military strength could decrease to about 270,000 with around 150,000 soldiers and about 120,000 officers and non-commissioned officers. If this happens, the total military strength of North and South Korea will differ by about 4 to 1. Even now, the North Korean military has a much larger force than the South Korean military, and if the population structure continues in the current direction, that gap could widen even further. Especially in a situation where the number of army troops is greatly reduced, it can become more difficult to deploy the necessary forces and secure reserve troops in the border areas. If a small number of troops are responsible for a large area, there may not be enough personnel to redeploy when units need support or reinforcements. What's important here is that you can't judge the outcome of a war based solely on the number of troops. The South Korean military has strengths over the North Korean military in areas such as Air Force and Navy precision strike capabilities, surveillance and reconnaissance systems, information and communications technology, and defense industry capabilities. Therefore, it's not appropriate to compare actual combat power based solely on the numbers. 1.13 million for North Korea and 270,000 for South Korea. However, the situation can change if the war becomes prolonged. When combat continues, not only frontline combat troops, but also rear support, equipment maintenance, supply, transportation security, and facility defense become important. This is because a large number of personnel are needed for various tasks such as evacuating the wounded. This is also why the US military's operational principles state that the attacking side must secure a significant numerical advantage over the defending side, and the defending side must also deploy enough troops to defend key areas. It is commonly mentioned that an attacking force needs about a 3 to 1 advantage, while a defending force can hold out with relatively fewer troops. However, if the structure projected for 2040 comes true, with about 1.13 million North Korean troops and about 270,000 South Korean troops, North Korea would have roughly 4 times as many troops as South Korea, just in terms of numbers. This means that it will become even more important for South Korea to decide where and how many troops to deploy for defense. Especially even if North Korea does not deploy all its troops at once, the South Korean military must be prepared to respond to situations that could occur simultaneously in multiple areas. This includes not only the front lines, but also major cities and ports. Defense personnel are also needed for airports, military facilities, and command centers. Therefore, as troop numbers decrease in the future, the key issue will be how quickly the restructuring of units, expansion of unmanned systems, and strengthening of reserve forces promoted by the Ministry of National Defense can fill the resulting gaps in military strength. This leads to the following question. The question is, if there aren't enough people, can't we just replace them with drones and AI? In fact, the Ministry of National Defense is actively promoting the establishment of an integrated manned-unmanned combat system as a key solution to the decrease in available personnel, drones, and unmanned aerial vehicles. The plan is to expand unmanned forces, such as unmanned submarines, and actively utilize AI technology for the surveillance and security of major military facilities. The Ministry of National Defense has announced a vision to significantly expand unmanned forces by 2040 and to restructure the military so that some security roles previously handled by people will be automated. The advantages of this approach are clear. Even without people being directly involved in combat, it allows for long-term surveillance and reconnaissance, and by operating multiple unmanned systems at the same time, it is possible to continuously monitor a wide area, especially in areas that require repetitive surveillance, such as the GOP or major military facilities. A method that combines sensors, radar, cameras, and AI analysis systems to automatically detect unusual movements can be used. This is more effective than having people constantly monitor all the screens. It can be more efficient for AI to analyze large amounts of data first, and then filter and report suspicious situations. However, there are clear limitations to this. This is because the tasks that unmanned systems can handle and the tasks that must be done by humans are different. Drones can conduct reconnaissance, but you still need personnel to maintain the equipment and manage batteries and parts. Skilled personnel are also needed to analyze the information collected by unmanned vehicles and to connect it to operational commands. If you consider situations where communication networks are cut off or unmanned systems do not function properly due to electronic warfare attacks, it is difficult to entrust all tasks to technology. Another important issue is that as advanced weapons increase, the value of specialized personnel to operate them also rises. Fighter jets, air defense systems, precision strike weapons, satellite communications. To properly operate electronic warfare equipment and unmanned systems, you need personnel with sufficient training and experience. Securing a lot of equipment and having the ability to actually use that equipment effectively on the battlefield are two different issues. Therefore, the future of the Korean military is likely to move toward increasing AI and unmanned systems as the number of personnel decreases, but it's difficult for technology to completely replace human forces. On the contrary, since fewer personnel will have to operate more advanced equipment, the importance of specialized personnel who can handle high-level technology within the military may become even greater. The decadent era of decreasing troop numbers is not simply to reduce personnel, but to figure out how to combine people, AI, and unmanned systems so that combat power can be maintained even with fewer soldiers.